Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is going to be part 4 and the final part, unless I add a few supplemental videos, to the Agrarianism series. This one is going to be escaping the Monkeysphere and becoming a Yaleman, or in other words, getting out of this urbane existence and starting a more rural existence. And I'll I'll posit about 4 reasons why you'd want to do that, and they sort of tie in with the previous videos. For starters, happiness, just your own enjoyment. There's been numerous studies about who is happiest in this world, and shocker, it tends not to be about material possessions so much as it tends to be about the little things that add up every day. In fact, I've got a personal anecdote that I will not be sharing in this video, but I probably will share at some point about why I have that perspective on happiness and what makes a person truly live a life worth leading, worth living, what have you. Anyway, one of the most interesting studies that I ever read, and I'm afraid that I can't recall it to cite properly, but you can look this up very easily. You can be a yellow belt at Google Foo and still find this out, and that is that among the happiest people are the Amish. Well, what do the Amish? What makes them happy? Well, one, like I've mentioned in previous videos, their Monkeysphere is what they know. They don't interact with people beyond that very frequently, unless they're like selling them tomato sprouts or something. And as such, they have a community that they can rely upon whenever they're beset by obstacles, whenever they have an issue. Whereas with modernity, especially thanks to social media and consumption culture, people feel alienated, isolated. Additionally, people travel all over the country in search of work or places to live, and they end up not being around the circle of friends they grew up with. They end up not being around the circle of friends they went to school with. They end up not being around their families at all. It's just really dismal. And then you look at the Amish, and they do all of those things in reverse. It's the complete polar opposite, and they're happier. So that's the biggest incentive. And some people may be prone to see this and think, well, if I were to do something like that, it sounds almost like you're saying to be a modern Amish. Well, didn't the hippies do that and fail spectacularly? Well, here's the thing. What was their motivation, and what caused them to go back to the cities? What turned the hippies into yuppies? So, in other words, well, their motivations, and some people they stuck it out, and good for them. But for the most part, it was political. They wanted to be around people who were like-minded. They wanted to be communal, which the Amish are communal, but they're also communal based on the establishment of a religion. So communalism works great when everybody's falling in line because the leader is a deity, and as such you still have to follow their rules or get shunned. And I'll touch up on that here in a minute, actually. Hippies didn't have that. You had to either fall in line, or if you didn't, there wasn't really much they could do about it. So that caused a lack of social cohesion. Additionally, the hippies didn't use kin selection as a basis for forming their groups, and so they also fell apart for that reason. And lastly, in addition to the political reasons, there was an inherent boomer selfishness to why they set up that system. So the minute something better came along, they all left and jumped on it. Like I said, when I say all, I don't mean all. But that was one of the chief reasons why their system had failed. It wasn't built on an altruistic or purely good motivation. It wasn't like, I just want to be happy and this will make me happy. And actually, I'll add one more thing. During that era, some of the technological progression that we've reached that makes it easier actually hadn't taken place yet. The biggest one being the internet, which, that's how you're learning about agrarianism for me right now. That wasn't a thing. Like before that, it was just, hey, me and the dudes, we're gonna start a hippie commune. Jeremy here, his dad used to grow tomatoes in his yard, so we're just gonna do what he says. Plus, we'll go to the local library. That was like how you learned how to do stuff. So it's no wonder with that lack of information that it sort of imploded. So that's something to bear in mind. Another motivation for leaving the urban lifestyle, spiritual, and I mentioned that in the previous video. Wendell Berry, and I highly recommend you read Wendell Berry if you're even remotely curious about this sort of stuff. His arguments for agrarianism are not just in terms of happiness, but also erosion and toxicity of pollution and nutrient deficiency in the soil. Like the food is destroying you in the cities, and if you grow your own, you'll be happier and healthier just from a chemical standpoint. Just from a gut biome standpoint, you'll be better off. But one of the things he claims all the time, Wendell Berry is very religious. He is a Christian, and he claims that if you really believe in God, then you would want to be a steward of His creation rather than to exploit His creation. And I see that similarly with the Amish. Even though the Amish don't revere nature at all, in fact, if you actually interact with Amish folk, you'll find that they have a relatively exploitative view of nature, except because of their views on simplicity, it provides a curtail from actually doing any real damage compared to, say, factory farms. And that's not a criticism of them, it's just a simple objective truth. I hate when people romanticize other cultures and views. It's very annoying. Same thing with the American Indians, The American Indians, they lived in harmony with nature, and they tamed the horses. Like, no, the horses came from Europe, and they did plenty, trust me. Not condemning them, just saying it wasn't this paint with all the colors of the wind thing. But Wendell Berry, his argument about stewardship, I think, is a valid point. If you're watching this and you believe in Christianity, then I think it should be difficult to believe in an inherent urban existence. Well, this goes double or maybe even triple for people of more pantheistic and pagan belief structures, because honestly, in my opinion, I don't think a person can be pagan and urban at the same time. It's like you worship nature, but you live in a concrete jungle. Like, unless you're going to invent a new pantheon and there's like a subway god, I think you're in the wrong place. Start walking. Go someplace greener. Let me think. What else? Stewardship, paganism, the hippies failed. The Amish are happier. Those are the biggest reasons. I touched up on the fact that you would actually be healthier because you're getting a normal, sane amount of sunshine. Not, still wear a hat. And by the way, that's something I have to tell everybody every time I take them in the woods. That they show up like with nothing. They'll show up. I go in the woods with people, or out in the prairie with people with flipping sandals and no hat. It's like, you are gonna be miserable. The horse flies, the deer flies, the ticks, the sun beating down on you. Wear a hat. There's a reason why everybody wore hats until like the 60s, and then culture decided, hey, everybody should just show as much skin as possible. Oh, why do we all have cancer? It's so ridiculous. Wear a hat and wear boots. Really. But now to step back and start explaining the second half of this vid, which is the most important thing. It's why I made this vid. Things that you can do to break out of this Monkeysphere, to establish a small community, to live a more rural lifestyle. The first thing, and I realize there's tons of obstacles with that. Most people, their argument is, oh yeah, why don't I just go buy a big ranch? I hear Ted Nugent is selling land somewhere. No, obviously I get that is a huge obstacle, but it's kind of like that line Clint Eastwood told the kid in Gran Torino. He talks about not having enough tools. He's like, well, surely even you can understand that over a period of many years, a man slowly acquires these tools. Well, it's the same thing with this. I'm not telling you tomorrow, go buy a ranch, go chop down some trees, build yourself a log cabin, call it a day. No. For starters, start growing things where you are. Even if you are in a 200 square foot broom closet apartment in New York, get some little plants and start growing things so you can develop a bigger appreciation for growing things. Start reading books and going online and reading about growing things, reading about how to do these sorts of things. Um, if you want to like really get in the mood, the spirit of this sort of attitude, the Foxfire books are great. They're not so great when it comes to actual hard information. Um, yeah, I grew up in this kind of environment. I grew up knowing how to grow things and preserve things and things like that. So as an adult, I'd heard about the Foxfire books and I started reading. I was like, whoa, this is bad. But in other words, acquire knowledge first and foremost, because knowledge is almost always free in one shape or form. And that's another thing you could do. If you go to a university, even if it's not your major, as an elective, take a few agriculture courses. Learn a few things like that. Learn a few skills. Learn related skills. I mean, it seems like half of agriculture is really jury rigging and fixing things that on a shoestring budget. Learn how to fix things. Learn how to understand the way things work. Learn animal husbandry, things like that. If you live in the suburbs, if you're able to, from a legal standpoint, get some backyard chickens, things like that. Most importantly, establish a like-minded community with people who think the same way. I guarantee you it would be relatively easy to find a group of at least a dozen other people in an urban or suburban setting who have the same feelings you do. And if you start talking to them and start sharing ideas with them, that's going to encourage you towards reaching your ultimate goal, which may be years down the line. Hopefully not. Hopefully just a year or two. But you get the idea. There's going to be obstacles, but you start slow. Most importantly, building that community. That's the biggest reason to want a rural existence to begin with. Is being with like-minded people and being altruistic with them and being compassionate and seeing them as fully human. Well, if you establish something like that, even in an urban environment, well, there you go. You're already halfway there. A gardening club, for example. There's a word for that. There's people that actually will go to like public lots and things and just grow things in big cities. We've got some beautiful examples of that. By the way, I was in Denver not too long ago. Beautiful examples of that. What do they call that? Is it renegade farming or something like that? It's got a cool name too. Do things like that, and then as you start growing in knowledge, as you start growing in experience, as you've got sort of a support structure to help you, now start looking at moving to small towns, to isolated areas, middle of nowhere. Check them out, scout them out. Take your little tribe with you that you've established. That's huge. Build a tribe first, unless you already have one in a small town, which is, you're already several steps ahead if that's the case. Look at land. Land is usually a lot cheaper in the boondocks than it is where you're probably used to if you're living in urban existence. There's a huge difference between 20 acres in middle of nowhere, West Virginia, hundreds of miles from any nightclub, and a 100 square foot lot downtown. Huge price difference. So it's not going to be as intimidating as you might think. Similar thing with housing. If there's not a pre-existing structure where you're looking, setting up something, look into berm houses, geodesic domes, earth ships. That's what they're called, earth ships. Small houses, even trailers. There's no shame in that. I don't know why people malign them so much. And then they love those little tiny houses. Like, trailers are better than those little tiny houses in my opinion. They're just as portable almost, and they're bigger. I don't get it, but yeah, look for. In other words, start small and expand outward from there. It's not going to be as expensive as you think. The big problem that people have, what really screws people up when they have these kinds of dreams and goals, is one, they're out to make a massive profit off of it. They're like, we're gonna sell microgreens and we're just gonna do well. It's like, no, you're gonna have bad seasons, you're gonna have bad years. It's gonna be hard work. It's gonna take a lot of time. It's certainly not for everybody. But if you have that kind of community support structure set in place where multiple people can do this, that's going to help you tremendously. And if people have different skill sets, that's another thing. When you look for a group like that, learn different things. Somebody should be good with animals at least. Somebody should be knowledgeable about animal diseases at least. Somebody should be good at fixing things at least. You see how that works? There's a huge difference between incubating hens and fixing a John Deere. And sometimes you need multiple people who are good at multiple things in order to get multiple things done. Another thing you can do is actually, and I highly recommend this because this is free. Go be a ranch hand. Go be a farmhand. Go, when you've got a week off, instead of going on actual vacation, go somewhere and do actually that kind of grueling work for whatever they're willing to pay you. You could, again, there's a shortage of that, especially if you habla inglés. And I don't mean that in a stereotypical way, it's just the truth. Start small, get out there, and if you find out that it is something that enriches you, take the plunge. You won't starve to death. And if you acquire land, and I highly recommend you save up money to acquire it outright rather than taking out a big loan or anything. I despise debt of any kind. If you can do that, that's even better because worst case scenario, you decide, oh, this isn't for me, and I don't like this, and my support structure, the community that I built, they're falling apart. We don't really like each other. Turns out, well, you've still got land that you could sell. You're not going to be that bad off. It's not that big of a risk. And chances are, if along the way you're learning these things, you're taking part in community gardening, and you're talking to people, and you're raising the backyard chickens and so forth. You're taking all these steps. By the time you get to the big plunge, you'll probably already know for sure if this is for you or not. So that's really what I'm saying. This isn't a call to. Whenever people think about neo-agrarianism, they think, oh, okay, tomorrow I need to go $1 million in debt buying 100 acres and setting up a massive ranch or a commune or something like. No, take it slow. Nobody's asking you to jump off a bridge, man. We're asking you to walk over to a bridge, then measure it, then maybe climb to the bottom. Build a ladder. You're not going to fall if you build a ladder. So that's really all there is to this video. I hope you guys liked it, and see you later. I think that's the end of the agrarian series. Bye.